What's going on, guys? It's fight season MMA, and today I wanted to make a video talking about why Charles Oliveira, in my opinion, is the only UFC lightweight currently that has a shot to beat Islam Macmakhachev. And I know that might be a crazy take, but I saw something in this Michael Chandler fight that really allows me to see a way that Charles Oliveira can ultimately get the win against Islam Macmakhachev. Charles looks so good. He was doing everything that he wanted to, and considering that Islam is so well-rounded, he's such a good striker, he's such a good opponent, I think that Charles Oliveira implementing this one strategy against Michael Chandler, who is an amazing fighter, as I've said, would really go distance in leagues to beat every other fighter inside the organization. I know Charles Oliveira also lost to Arman Tsarukyan, but I do think that Charles is going to have a better stylistic matchup to go in there and beat Islam Macmakhachev. So in this video, I kind of want to talk about why Charles Oliveira's new strategy that he's kind of employed, especially against Michael Chandler, is going to be so effective in an Islam Makhachev fight. But if you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That's the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications, just so you guys are always and furtherly notified about UFC content releasing every single day. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video talking about Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, and why I do think that Charles has the best shot to beat him. So, Charles Oliveira had his fight with Michael Chandler at the co-main event of UFC 309, Jones versus Miocic, and genuinely, Charles Oliveira looked absolutely stupendous in that fight. He was going in there and employing every little tactic he had. In my opinion, he won 49-46 with that final round going to Chandler and those first four getting peeled off straight to Charles Oliveira. But in this fight, it really showed me that Charles Oliveira has matured a lot inside the organization, as well as Chandler, but Chandler still has a lot of deficiencies in this game, but Charles Oliveira has really well-rounded out his skill set to probably become top 10, if not top 5, or maybe even top 3 most well-rounded fighters inside the organization. The big thing that I want to talk about today is Charles Oliveira's wrestling ability, because in that fight with Arman Tsarukyan, he got out-wrestled, and that was the big thing that led to the decision victory going in favor of Arman. And I really do think Charles Oliveira implementing a better wrestling game in his approach is going to help him a lot. Another fighter that we talk about needing to implement a wrestling game, and he's an older guy, not as old as Oliveira, is Brian Ortega. If Ortega had a good wrestling game, then he would be able to employ his jiu-jitsu. But also, getting a wrestling game is going to help with defense, but it's also going to help with your offense. In this fight against Michael Chandler, it was actually stunning to see Charles Oliveira wrestle. And it was actually very, very, very apparent to see that he was out-wrestling Chandler in some of these exchanges. And I think that if he can do that to Michael Chandler, who is an all-American wrestler, one of the best wrestlers inside the UFC, if he can implement that with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ability and his stand-up game, he is going to be one of the toughest fighters within the organization to beat. You saw Chandler have so much different troubles with Charles Oliveira's jiu-jitsu, which we already knew was going to happen. But Charles was getting takedowns on Chandler, getting takedowns from the side of the octagon, lifting him, moving in any other direction, stuff that we haven't seen from Oliveira prior. Charles being able to initiate these different exchanges and all this different type of thing is only going to elevate his game. And yes, it 100% helps that you kind of have one of the best bases in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu inside the organization. Charles Oliveira is probably the most prestigious Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist currently within the organization. And it's something insane to see, considering that he has so much Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that no one wants to go to that category. And the big thing that was stopping Oliveira was closing that distance to ultimately getting the takedown, which is also known as wrestling. Oliveira in that Chandler fight, like I said, he probably worked on it an absolute ton, considering that in that fight with Arman, he lost due to the wrestling. He had Arman in different chokes. He had him in a Darce choke. He had him in a guillotine. He had him in a lot of different things, but Arman was able to control the exchanges for the most part within that fight due to his higher tier of wrestling compared to Oliveira's. But now, Charles 100% is a more complete fighter than Mr. Arman Tsarukyan. And the other thing that really was apparent in this fight is Charles Oliveira seemed composed. He seemed relaxed, and that was incredible to see. This was the first time Charles Oliveira has ever gone past 3 rounds, which is crazy to say considering that this is Charles Oliveira's, 35th fight inside the organization or something like that. He's been in the UFC since 2010, and this is his first 5-round decision win coming here in 2024. And Charles Oliveira didn't look like he slowed down at all in the fight. Yes, in the 5th round he got clipped, but in the 4th round he looked great, but he seemed incredibly composed in there. And I think if Charles Oliveira can stay a little bit more composed, he's not going to get thrown around, and he's going to be able to conserve his energy a tiny bit more. But that leads to kind of the title of this video. Why is Charles Oliveira going to have a better shot at beating Islam Makhachev than any other lightweight currently within the organization? I look at the wrestling capabilities that he's added. Now, yes, Oliveira is not going to be a better wrestler than Islam, but what Oliveira is better at than Islam is he is a way better jiu-jitsu artist. And I think that using that wrestling ability to throw up different exchanges, to be able to flip Islam, to be able to do stuff like that, I think is going to be very helpful with him in these different exchanges, considering that Islam is so big and so aggressive on the ground. I look at that first fight with Charles, and the biggest thing that it was taken was Charles's chin also was very fragile in that fight. And maybe his chin was so fragile just because he was so reckless, but having that upgraded wrestling ability and having that increased composure is going to make Charles fight at a little bit of a longer distance. And you might be thinking, why is the wrestling going to do that as well? I think Charles, knowing that he has the wrestling in his game, doesn't always have to keep the fight very close like in a phone booth, because prior Charles Oliveira would have to push the fight up to the cage and then kind of jump onto the back and do some weird way to get to the fight to the ground, or possibly go from a knockdown to a submission attempt or ground control like in the Justin Gaethje fight. There wasn't a lot of wrestling capabilities in that. Even the Dustin Poirier fight, Charles Oliveira got Poirier's back while standing. That was all Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. No wrestling in that fight. So I think Charles implementing the wrestling, especially against Chandler, and that's a very tough test, if he can go in and do that, it's going to 100% be something that is going to allow him to maximize, to succeed all of his predecessors inside the division, except Islam. Islam is that good to where I think that Oliveira still should be the underdog in this fight. I don't think there should be a clear favorite to go in there and beat Islam, but I see the wrestling that was implemented into his game plan against Chandler. Chandler was thought to be one of the best matchups for Islam in order to beat him, and Oliveira out-wrestled him. He outstruck him, he out-wrestled him, he out-composed him. He did a lot of different things to truly sit there and just feel like he is one of the best fighters within the UFC right now. And I think that fight with Michael Chandler was one of the best things to truly see of why Charles Oliveira's game is developing still. When he fought Islam Makhachev back in 2022 for the UFC Undisputed lightweight title, he seemed a little frantic in there. He seemed a little panicky in there. And I understand that that was a very hard weight cut for him, and that was a very different scenario since he was fighting in Abu Dhabi, but Charles Oliveira now seems more comfortable than ever fighting at lightweight and kind of composing himself genuinely to be able to go out there and beat all these number one contender killers out there. Because as much as Michael Chandler is at number 7 ranked inside the organization in that lightweight division, he still has the shot to beat any one of those top 5 guys. You're telling me that Michael Chandler couldn't beat Poirier or Gaethje or Arman or even Islam, or to that matter. He is so good. And for Charles to go in and do that in that fashion, it truly is a massive star on his asterisk, on his resume, to say that this guy has implemented a wrestle plan. He's implemented so much other stuff, and genuinely he can go in there to compete with Islam. Now, I do think I would still favor Islam, but Charles Oliveira having the grappling is now split up equally into 2 categories, give or take, being the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist within the organization, while on the other hand, having a great wrestling background to back it up is only going to help him implement the Jiu-Jitsu when he gets down to those different positions, kind of get the fight standing, get it down to the ground. Now, that might be hard for Islam, but that wrestling is also going to help him defend against Islam's strong Sambo style. And as well, Charles Oliveira implementing a more casual, composed game plan is going to allow him to see everything coming from Islam better, which is absolutely quintessential when you understand how calculated and how strategic Islam is in every single move that he has within the octagon. Like I said, Oliveira, amazing win versus Chandler. There was a lot to take from that fight, and I am just so impressed of how Charles Oliveira has grown over his time in the UFC, and even at the age of 35 years old, he is still improving every little minuscule aspect of his game, and I genuinely think that he is Islam Makhachev's toughest challenge inside the organization right now. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think down below in the comment section about Charles Oliveira improving his wrestling game. I think that Charles Oliveira improving that wrestling game is going to help him so much with every single fighter in the UFC lightweight division, but most importantly, it's going to help him with Islam Makhachev, kind of stop reversals, kind of stop Islam overpowering him, and which was very apparent in that first fight. But also, Charles Oliveira calming himself down, being able to understand that he doesn't have to go 100 miles an hour the entire time is going to allow him to genuinely take a minute, assess the situation, and go out there and implement the best strategy rather than just trying to get to his grappling ability off a knockdown or something like that. It's going to allow him to kind of see everything and just be more strategic in every little bit of his game. Charles Oliveira is so technical. He displayed that against Michael Chandler incredibly well, and he went in there and he did what he needed to do, ultimately getting the 5-round decision over Chandler in a very dominant win. And he showed so much stuff that made Speaks believe that he can go in there and beat Islam Macmakhachev if everything goes right and he plays the plan accordingly. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if they enjoy the UFC content. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always notified about UFC content dropping every single day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.